Okay. Alrighty, so we are recording. If you would please just put something in the chat at some point during our recording, just so that I can be sure that I give you credit for having been to the Zoom. Okay, so it's easier for me to kind of go down that list instead of trying to remember. Although I do try to remember who was there, because I want to hear what your experiences are and what you're thinking and what you're doing. So this is our first Zoom together for this particular class. And some of you, I know we've had classes before, but nevertheless, it's always wonderful to get to interact with everybody and get to know you a little better, and get to know some who I have not worked with before, because I'm fairly new to SUU, coming from Alabama. Okay, so I don't want to be a talking head here, because I want this hour to be yours, so that you can take the time and have your personal PhD at your service. How may I serve you as we are launching our exploration together of exemplary teaching in the 21st century? And I was pretty excited to read all of the wonderful discussion posts that you all contributed to. And I thank you for that, because if we were meeting together on campus, we would have that time to really talk together and dig in depth. And so that you put so much energy and effort and heart into our discussion board is really helpful, because then that way we learn with and from each other. So we got this big topic of exemplary teaching in the 21st century. Let me just let you kind of open up, and which way would you find it to be helpful to use our hour together? Just call it out. I've got good wait time.
Well, I didn't get a chance to finish all the readings this week or get to the discussion post. So I read a few of them, like about the, what is it called? Like oh my gosh, the first few that talked about the disadvantage that underserved populations face when it comes to education. Mm-hmm. And I actually, I'm curious if people have seen that firsthand, or what their experience has been with that, or things that they've done to like try to combat that. I think that'd be cool.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. The opportunity gap. What does that look like here?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That is kind of the foundation. You can't really understand exemplary teaching without understanding that issue of the opportunity gap, because exemplary teachers are addressing that opportunity gap. So that's a good question.
I was wondering, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go right ahead.
I was wondering, how does that work with, because my experience, my friends that have taught in Title I schools and places where a lot of the kids are struggling with different things, with two jobs and, everything with a mom or whatever it is. They have extra money and they say, oh, we're Title I, so we have all this money for our programs. How does that fit in? I know there are things like there are other things that there's no way the opportunity gap could be made up, but is that something, I'm curious on your opinion, Dr. Harris, like how is that just in Utah that we have such, I know we still have an opportunity gap, so how does that fit in with that?
As far as funding for Title I?
Yeah, like a lot of times the schools, because we've talked about how they don't have the same, certain populations aren't getting the things they need, the resources, the good teachers, all of those things.
Yeah.
And in at least around where I live, it seems like we do try to funnel money that way. There's
Mhm.
still an opportunity gap. How does that work, and how does that come together, I guess?
Yeah, and that is a really interesting question because school funding is based on neighborhoods. Are you guys hearing the feedback or is it just me? You are hearing feedback? Okay, I don't know what that was about. But so school funding is actually local. And so therefore, what you have a lot of times is the tax base in certain communities isn't able to contribute as much as in other communities. So I'm old enough to remember in Salt Lake City when Superintendent John Benyon, I don't know if any of you are familiar with his name, but he was one of the instructors at the University of Utah, and Salt Lake City went through kind of an effort of trying to level the playing field with funding. So you had the East Bench being very affluent up toward the university, and then the West Side was more like the communities, the minoritized communities, and often didn't have that tax base. And so the idea was to, instead of divide along State Street, it would be to cut it across the city the other way, so that you had people coming from the East benches and coming together across that way rather than north and south. And he got death threats and everything else. So people aren't necessarily very excited to equalize the playing field. And so hence you have these kind of things like Title I, where the idea is like, well, let's where the communities aren't generating all that many resources because businesses are moving out. When you have a lot of white flight, they take their resources with them. And so then you end up with food deserts, and you end up with less transportation and all kinds of things. And so you have this opportunity gap. And so definitely the Title I funding helps, but oftentimes you've got other things that are factoring into it as well. You have the newest teachers with the least experience are often placed in those schools. And so and even you have things like, I know my children went to school in Granite School District, and then when we moved to Alabama, they went to a high school where they did not even have advanced math classes in certain parts of the city. And so you had opportunity gaps that way. So certainly funding things help, but they definitely do not solve all of the issues that are related to the opportunity gap. One of the things that I ran into as a mother was that my children don't pass as white. And so we lived in a very diverse area of South Salt Lake. And then so our neighborhood school was beautiful with all the richness of different languages, backgrounds, and a lot of neighbors were facing a lot of economic challenges. Some of them were economic refugees from Mexico. And so the academic engagement in our local public school was such that it was a lot of policing of bodies, but not a lot of instruction. And so I would protest that very much. Like, if it isn't acceptable for my children, why would it be acceptable for other people's children? And so finally, at the superintendent's office, they said, look, you just go around and you find a school that you think that would be a good one, that has high academic achievement, that really fosters learning. You pick it. And so then we won't have to hear you complaining. So I spent time going all around the schools in Salt Lake City School District. Now this is in the 90s. So it was, a different group of teachers in the schools at the time. And I found a school that I thought would be just vibrant. But do you know that my children still did not have access to it because their teachers often had low expectations for them and would interact with them in ways that did not allow them to have access to high academic engagement. So my kindergartner, for example, they started school in late August. By October, she called me to say that she wanted to put him in special education. And when I asked her why, what was her thinking? I mean, I wasn't opposed to it, but her thought was that he didn't know how to speak English and that he wouldn't sing his name in circle time. And so that was very problematic about having a child in her classroom that in 10 weeks of instruction, she didn't even know that English is actually his first language. So so you had those kind of things contributing to the opportunity gap as well. You can sometimes have the resources there, but children's bodies and their identities are often such that teachers, if they're not aware of it, will intentionally or other, it's usually not intentional. They don't always foster that access to quality educational opportunities. So other people jump in there. I don't have to be the talking head.
I would like to say something.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Francine, and then somebody else wanted to.
Are you talking to me? Sorry.
Yeah, go
Go ahead. Okay, so with equal opportunity costs, like with equal opportunity for all students, is honors technically an equal opportunity? Because in my school district, we have someone who's trying to get rid of all honors because she says it's not making an equal opportunity in mathematics for all students. So she thinks all students should be in the same class. What are our thoughts like on that? Does anyone have any opinions? Like, does anyone teach at a school where they don't have honors and they see it working? Or is it
gifted
pulling back our honor students? Or is it lifting up our regular students? Where is it at? Because I'm really worried if they take that away from our school of what will happen without gifted and regular.
Okay, so let's hang on to that while Miss Francine adds her comments. So honors, because curriculum is big and programs. So funding, curriculum, programs. Miss Francine?
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna add to what you were talking about. So the school that I am at, the school district, we have a big school district, and it's without being I guess racist or whatever, the school district divided the school district in half to River Region and Mountain Region. And River Region, all the schools are on the reservation. Mountain Region, they're not. So that's obvious.
Yeah.
And a lot of the funding we do get Title I because our Native kids are struggling and all of that. And we have a lot of teacher turnover. And every year we have teachers that come from up north and they come for a year or two, and then we have to train another teacher the following year. And that's the same thing that's happening. And so this year we have several new teachers, and they're like, we work really hard to get our kids on grade level, and then we have a new teacher that comes that's barely learning, and then no learning happens again for that year, and then they go, and that has been continuing for years. And I had to do the same thing that you were saying. I sent my daughter to a mountain region school, so she rode the bus 45 minutes. I drove her to the bus 20 minutes, then she rode the bus 45 minutes every day, one way, and then then coming back again, just so that she can have the opportunity of those honors classes and the CTE classes that the school where we live don't provide any of that for our native kids. So I had to, for 4 years, that's what I did, bus her, get her there so that she can have all that opportunity. And it helped because now she's in college and all those classes that she had taken really helped everything. And I wish that would happen for all the kids that were in our community and that was possible for them to have that same opportunity without having to go to another school.
Yeah, that lends itself really to what Miss Kennedy's talking about, and that's an old debate. Even when I was teaching, I used to get into debates with our gifted and talented teacher because I would tell her all of my students were gifted and talented. And she would say, no, they're not, because they weren't all taking that test. They weren't all scoring that way. But it was kind of like what Miss Francine is saying. Well, some are getting this accelerated curriculum. Why are they not all getting quality education? So, and even when a lot of people will say, well, I teach in a school where we're all fairly affluent. We're all predominantly English speakers. We're all predominantly white, but even that in and of itself is an interesting inequity because that is segregated right there. If you have because our culture is very multilingual, very diverse, that you have these enclaves that are predominantly, very homogeneous, then something is going on. So anytime you have an advantage group, or we'll talk about it as disadvantage, you often hear that people will say, well, the kids are quote disadvantaged. Well, if we're in a canoe and one side is disadvantaged, the other side is necessarily advantaged. And so that's some of us, we have to make these choices as parents. We're like, I don't think that's okay, that my neighbor's children don't get that, but I got to bust my kid out, to be able to draw that distinction. So even in Salt Lake City, when I was in graduate school, we were doing observations on the east side of the city as compared to the west side of the city. The west side was doing a lot of coloring for their English language learners that were in middle school. And then on the other side of the city, they were reading, they had lofts, they had all this equipment for their science labs and so on. So I think, Ms. Kennedy, your point is well taken. I'm not sure that the answer is to just take away gifted and talented. My thought would be that we improve the instruction that we give to all children, not necessarily take something away. Miss Kristen, do you feel that kind of helps with the Title I? I mean, because really understanding that opportunity gap is kind of foundational to understanding what exemplary teachers do and why they do it.
Yeah, I like that discussion. I just wanted to discuss some of the other things around the funding. I definitely know all those other things are there, and I appreciate that discussion. Thank you. And Francine, I really liked your explanation too, and your firsthand account of things you've seen. So thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Miss Kennedy, do you feel like you would be able to contribute to that debate at your school in a meaningful way?
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I just don't know. Sorry. So I would agree. I don't know, it's really tricky with honor students because some students are a lot higher than others. And so it's such a debate. of should we get rid of honors or not. And I don't know where I stand because I teach both 7th grade regular and 7th grade honors mathematics, and I can see the split. Even if I were to take one of the kids from regular and put them in honors, they would really struggle because they aren't able to pick up as fast. So it's so hard for me to even pick a side, but I wanted to hear other people's sides just so I could maybe have some more information of how people are feeling just in general about it.
Yeah. And one thing to think about too is that that's really a straw man argument. Should we keep honors or not? Because if you really think about how we do schooling, our model of schooling came from the industrialization. And so the factory model of batch processing children. So we put them into these containers. We say 8 and 9-year-olds, we're going to put you here. And then 10 and 11-year-olds, we're going to put you here. And so we suggest that they're all going to 11 and 12-year-olds should be learning this. And so we have this kind of model where we're batch processing them. And then sometimes you have individuals within these containers that they may learn one way and others may learn another way. So it isn't necessarily always that some kids, quote, learn faster. It may be that they learn differently, or they may learn very well with the way that instruction is presented in that classroom. Their background may match very well with the patterns of interaction in the classroom and the knowledge that they're engaging in. Others maybe are more tactile. They may learn more with using hands-on and so on. And so, but if you think back to before children go to school, and you think to the times like, when do children start to sit up, to crawl, to walk? There's a pretty wide range of when kids do that. I had one child, one of my 6 children did not walk until that kid was like 8, over 2 years old. And then another one of my children walked at 9 months. And so the range is pretty big, and human beings are just like that. So it's kind of artificial that we put them in these containers and say, well, 8 and 9-year-olds do that. So it's kind of the issue of should we keep honors, not keep honors. It doesn't really address the issue of start with the learner, not the lesson plan. And so it's kind of a side conversation that doesn't get at, how are we fostering quality educational opportunities for all learners based on where they are. And some people would call that differentiating it. Others would talk about it more as being identity based, where you're just finding out what do learners know. There's often patterns in the community, in the classroom, of interest, and so then you develop high levels of academic achievement, high levels of cultural competence, that critical consciousness. So that's kind of a different way of thinking of it, rather than should we keep honors, not keep honors. Miss Carly.
I'm just thinking about the math. Like, I went through school and we had all the different levels and we had different classes, but my daughters are both, I have twins in high school, and they've changed the math. So they're kind of all in the same group, and they're struggling. When they need help, the teacher says, do your Alex, like an app that's supposed to teach them. Yeah. And the teachers are teaching. So I had one daughter already move classes. Like, I 100% think that they need to be in a class where it's on their level. Like, they're not honors kids like I was, but they can't even get to that point because they can't get through the basic math that they need to understand in order to progress. And I'm trying to get them to just do it on their own and do it online by themselves, because I think they could be more effective guiding themselves, because Alex is much broader, I think, all the topics. Like they
Mhm.
just kind of go through and they check things off and they try to do a holistic approach when they need some specific math teaching, and the teacher gets mad because the kids aren't doing well. And I want to say, hey, maybe teach your kids that
Yeah.
you can't rely on an app to do it for you.
Yeah, there
So
you
I
go.
agree that they need to have the levels where they're at. The kids need to be able to be taught where they are.
And that really leads to what Goldie Mohammed was talking about in her historically responsive literacy model. You got to have skills. You just have to have skills, and you have to have intellect, and you have to base it on identities, and then you're looking at that criticality. And so the skills and the intellect are going to fit with high levels of academic achievement. So definitely you have to have skills. And whether you're teaching in high school or you are teaching in kindergarten, a responsive teacher is going to spot diagnostically, well, these are our general objectives that the state core curriculum gives us for this grade level. And so we're like, okay, some of them, and we individualize it and we say, okay, now these diagnostically, green dot, red dot, if I'm going around looking at how they're doing their algorithms or whatever it is, then I can see, well, these three need a particular, let me pull them out and let me do some small group or maybe even individual work to bring them so that they're like assessing or they're able to develop those skills. So, just like when you teach cursive handwriting or something, you want them to have the skills and they have that basic toolbox of skills, and then they learn, so they can kind of personalize their own style and flair. So you have that basic craftsmanship, and then they kind of take it and use it and act on it. So I think, all of those things are part of providing equity in education, where not all of us learn the same, not all of us learn at the same pace. And then too, what is it that we're being asked to learn? If it's like with the butterfly girl, and your norms or what you're teaching me is suggesting to me that my community and my community's ways of doing things, are the wrong way, well, then oftentimes kids will resist that, or they'll try to strip that off of themselves. So there's got to be a way of walking in both worlds, and not so much thinking about it's this either or. Either we have honors or we don't. In any classroom, you're always going to have to kind of be diagnostic in saying, okay, well, these are our objectives. No matter what group of children you have, they're going to learn at different rates and have different ideas about, why do I have to learn this? So some may see it quickly and be like, yeah, I got to learn this. And others may be like, this sounds stupid to me. And so they may resist it a little bit, but definitely skills, intellect, that criticality, and that identity factor. So those are all really good points about this is very complex and it's coming together. No wonder new teachers struggle, right?
I have a comment towards that, if that's okay.
Sure.
So what you were saying along the lines of students and giving them a background and of understanding. Well, what I've noticed with students is what has happened over their years of learning mathematics is someone along the way told them that they were awful at math, or that they can't do math.
I've seen
and
that.
They don't believe in themselves. And it sometimes comes from the elementary school teachers because they don't like teaching math, or they weren't fond or good at math, so they kind of skip part of it. Or it comes from the parent side of, I'm not good at math, so you're not good at math.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it come from both ways, because I have a couple students this year, and actually 7th grade regular, who are very, very, very good at math. And they constantly stop and praise me and say, you just know how to teach it. I did not understand any math last year. I didn't learn math at all. It skipped me.
Whoa, that just
And I'm like, wait,
how
what?
important the teacher is. Right, yeah. And that's pretty common. That's across the US society where you see a gender gap in STEM. And math is a big one where you will hear a lot of girls say that. I remember my mother saying that. I was really fortunate to have a lot of teachers who were very good at doing that. They addressed the criticality of it, knowing that girls are often called on less. And as you say, then these become teachers and they want to avoid that. And so there's a lot of reasons at various levels over time why women have historically not been associated with doing well in math. But that's where we work against the grain as educators and show examples of women doing very well in math and telling them, you know, you can do this. And then, as you're saying, Ms. Kennedy, set it up that they can be successful with those skills and see the usefulness of it and which, like, where did the zero come from? It's super interesting and very diverse in terms of where does our knowledge about mathematics come from and why is it more than just an algorithm? So super interesting. Let me ask you this as far as the where we're going with our we've the first couple weeks, first couple modules, we're really focusing on this foundation of that schools have historically not served all learners well. And then it's these exemplary teachers that are able to kind of intervene and redirect things. They're successful where others continue to fail. And so we're looking a lot at equity and trauma, and that's, I'm really going to be looking for your discussions on that. That's why I appreciate the comments so much. So do you kind of feel like you're grasping that that foundation and where you're headed toward? The first part is kind of the biggest, and then once you get that foundation set, then you're going toward your own classroom and then next steps, and linking it to the Utah standards of effective teaching. Do you feel like that's kind of making sense to you, as we're still at the beginning of it, but it's going to go quickly? That 7 weeks is going to zip by. It's all super clear. Good. What do you think, Miss Emily? Yeah, it's making sense. Okay, good. All right.
I just have a quick question. I think that it's starting to make sense, and I know, I don't know if you're referring to the final paper, you know, how you're saying that the section 1 is the biggest section. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, because that really sets the stage and it's historically situated. Yeah. So I think one example where you kind of see the consequences of generations of inequitable schooling is in the US, our prison system is overwhelmingly minoritized, where our higher education is overwhelmingly white. So it's clear that you know, there's some, it can't possibly be that the mainstream society just does this excellent job of valuing education, and then all these other groups do not. So there's some disconnect there over the generations. And so, but yet there's always been school teachers who have been able to redirect that, even in the most difficult times. I came at SUU, we had our spring break kind of early, and I went to Georgia, and I was the visiting scholar at Georgia College and State University. And one of the questions that I got when I was talking about exemplary Black teachers, which is what my research has been on, and so one of the people asked me, why, what do you think, like, teaching is so hard today. It's kind of surprising even that people want to be teachers, that we still have people coming into our profession. And it is true that in recent surveys, presently, over 40% of teachers who are in classrooms today in public schools in the United States are considering getting out. So that's a high percentage. And then we're also losing teachers. So we have kind of this, we have this teacher shortage. And so kind of recognizing that the difficult challenges of teaching, we just came through and are still dealing with the effects of the pandemic and so on. And so it's definitely a hard time to be a teacher. And yet, if you look back over time, it has always been a tough time to be a teacher. It's just that what the tough time looked like was different when Big Mama was teaching. And then when Mr. Hayes and Mr. Crenshaw were the next generation teaching, it was always just a different kind of hard to teach, but teachers have always risen to the challenge. And so that's kind of where we go into teaching, because most of us know we're not going to get rich. Most of us know that we're going to be overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated. And yet we still go into the field. And so why do we do that? And overwhelmingly, it's because teachers will report, they'll say, I love children. I love learning. And then you put learning and children together, and you want to be a teacher. You love helping people and inspiring them in your content area and so on. And so you have these people who want to be dream keepers, and yet the continuous leaking of the educational pipeline shows that we don't always have dream keeping teaching. And so you got kind of this disparity between what we as a profession want to do and what we are doing. And so what can we learn from these teachers that have historically made that connection between schooling as the great equalizer and being warm demanders and dream keepers? And that's kind of what we're looking at and trying to assess with our own teaching. What is it? What is this exemplary teaching? How do we know that we're looking at it? Then what do we do? How do we assess our own classrooms? And what kind of next steps do we need so that we are exemplary teachers in our own context? We're not teaching at the time when the elders had to say to the rising generation, us ain't hogs. That's not our challenge. But our challenge in the 21st century, the kind of learning that we need to do is different than it was in the 20th and the 18th and the 19th century. So how do we close that gap? And some of you have done a really good job of kind of linking that together, of what makes teaching different in the 21st century, and then what is it that teachers do to close that gap so that their teaching is actually dream keeping, not dream wrecking. Because whether we want to or not, unintentionally, you see things like I forget who was just telling us, was it Miss Kennedy, I think, about the gap with women in STEM. You know, I don't think people intentionally do that, but it's a continuing gap. So you have your personal PhD for 19 more minutes.
Okay, I do have stuff to say about STEM. I think STEM is very, very important because I have a degree in just pure mathematics, not even in teaching, and then I decided to skip out on grad school for a master's and PhD in mathematics to go into education. And my STEM class and going up through it, I think they said that this is like the most girls that had ever been pursuing degrees in math that they had seen at my university. Because there was like 5 to every 15 boys. So it was the most they had seen in a long time. So it was really, really cool. And so when I talk about math to my students, I try to help them see how cool it is and how cool it can be by just the simple understanding. So I don't know, maybe that's not really part of our class discussion, but it was something I felt like I could share.
I feel like it is. I feel like what you just explained to us hits all 3 factors. High levels of academic achievement, that's what you're fostering. You're fostering high levels of cultural competence. I can be me and successful in school, particularly in math. I can still be feminine. I can still be how I understand being a girl. And you're addressing the issue that historically girls have not been seen as capable of math. And that's not necessarily intentional. If you think about kind of the developmental, as children get older, in kindergarten and preschool, if they're boys, if they're girls, however they identify, and of course we always, whether they're tiny children or not, you always have that issue of some children just don't really identify as either or. They're kind of this two-spirit. And so you have this group of small children, and they're so curious, and they all like exploring and looking at bugs and frogs and garbage, and they are very active. If anybody's ever been a kindergarten teacher, you know that they are very active, very curious. And then as they get a little older, it gets to be about they're 10 years old, they're in the 3rd to 4th grade. Girls start kind of moving away from math and science. And that's the age where girls and boys are starting to see each other as, oh, boys, I like that boy, or that boy likes me. And let me see if I could sneak a little kiss or whatever. So we start seeing each other in those kind of romantic, very juvenile sort of ways. But girls start understanding, well, our society, even if they can't articulate it in specific words, they know that our society has words and names for girls and women who are too mouthy, too smart, right? And one of those words starts with a B. You know what it is. And so girls will often go away from that, and then teachers will contribute to that, whether intentionally or not, by encouraging boys to be more active in it, expecting them to do well, expecting girls to struggle. And so it just kind of is, whether it's intentional or not, from the 4th grade on, girls tend to veer more toward pink collared, and boys tend to veer more towards the STEM, engineer, mathematics, science based. And interestingly enough, the higher paid salaries are going to be more the science based, math based. So I know my husband has a bachelor's degree in engineering, and I have 2 master's degrees, a bachelor's degree, endorsements, a PhD, and he has always made more money than I do. Because my career is in a pink colored thing. So you know, that is always discouraging, because we have more women who are heads of households now than we ever have before. And yet I would argue that no matter how society devalues our profession, this is a profession that is just incredibly meaningful and necessary in society, and we need dream keepers very much so. And people who come into our field tend to be people that have the basis to be dream keepers, because they're there because they want to see education be powerful and do powerful things, and so that children learn to grasp that and use it to act on their world. So unfortunately, we do see that it plays out, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's sexuality, those kind of things. It historically hasn't fared well, but that's where you come in, and the rubber hits the road in your classrooms, and where we interrupt that. We may not be able to do everything. We're not waiting for the big revolution, but it's like, what can I do in my sphere of influence, in my classroom, in my relationships with parents and other teachers and so on. So there's much that each teacher can do, even if we can't necessarily, you know, say, well, I'm going to fix all these inequities by next week.
Can I say a couple things?
Absolutely, Miss Sarah.
First of all, and this was a little bit back when with what you were saying, it's disturbing to me that we have so few men who enter the field of education, that our students desperately need more positive, trusted male role models. And they can have that in us, but it's just not enough.
Yeah.
So the hope is that we can continue incorporating men into the field of education, in which we so desperately need it. And then the other thing I was thinking, one day in class, I have some students that are Spanish speaking, and he does Google Translate with me, and he came up one day, and I took his phone and I sent a message to him, and I said, I am so sorry that I cannot be what you need me to be in this class. And I'm in the middle of getting my ESL endorsement right now while I'm doing this. And but it's, first of all, it was crazy, but more importantly, I have a way now. I don't speak Spanish, but I have more tools now. Yeah. And I think this program will have even more to serve these students who deserve to be served in a certain way. That right now, I'm not a proud woman. I know I can't serve them the way that they deserve. And living in the, watching your piece today and reading the butterfly story, that we have that here. We have it in a different way. They have it with skin color more so than we do. We have it with religion more so than that story tells. But it doesn't matter how we have the differences. It matters that we do have the differences and that we choose to do something about the differences.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I taught at the University of Memphis. And if you're familiar with Memphis at all, it's a chocolate city. And it is, you know, an amazing city with so many gifts and incredible people. And yet it is like Mobile, where I'm coming from, where they have too high of crime rates and poverty and so on in relation to their population size. It's just ridiculous. And so almost all of my students are first generation college students there, and I teach sociology there, and almost all of my students are Black. Some of them are Latinx. Sometimes you get students who are recent refugees and immigrants from other parts of the world, particularly some Pan-Asian. And so but one of the, I think I really experience what you're talking about, Miss Sarah, is like, I can do many things, and I do. You know, I do everything I possibly can to support them to be successful. And yet at the end of the day, you know, I cannot do everything for them. They do need Black professors and so on. But I also don't want to minimize the gifts that you do bring to your classroom, Miss Sarah. And I know that I do contribute things as well. So, you know, that's kind of where I think the humility comes in for all of us. We're never every kind of teacher that we need to be, but we do each have our own special gifts that only you, Miss Sarah, can bring to that particular group of students. And so even though you aren't a Spanish speaker, a primary Spanish speaker or whatever, there's still things that they're benefiting from you, because you bring your own. Teaching is an expression of ourselves. And so your gifts are going to benefit from them. And definitely they need to be able to see very successful people who are primary Spanish speakers and so on. And you can facilitate that as well. So it's just very much, I think, all of us kind of realizing that we do have many gifts that are unique and we can share, and we do share, because teaching is an expression of ourselves. And of course, you know, what I share, I think there's some things that each of you would bring to my students that I just can't give them. And so working together and kind of bringing resources together and people's different experiences, I try to do that by bringing in guest speakers and so on. So I would never want any of you to minimize the gifts that you do bring to your students. So you are very valuable as a resource for your students. And of course, you know, there are others who also can help to contribute to their learning. A lot of us can understand that if you have blended families, like I do. I have 2 stepchildren. And so my children very much know who their dad is, but they love and adore their stepdad too. And so he's not trying to replace them, but he adds something different to that. And so I think as teachers, we can do that too, where, you know, we bring our gifts and share that. And we can be exemplary teachers too. My own students in Alabama, my pre-service teachers, they would be sometimes struggling. They would say, do I have to be Black to be exemplary? Because a lot of our public schools are all Black in Mobile. And so the exemplary teachers that they were working with would say to them, no, you don't have to be Black. What you have to do is be able to connect with them, be able to begin with them, value them as I, thou, not I, it. And it really does seem like that's what you're doing, Miss Sarah. You're really connecting with them and listening to them and hearing them. And that is definitely the basis of exemplary teaching. That caring.
In our school, excuse me, they're pretty strict on having teachers' assistants and how many you can have. And I wanted to have a 3rd one, and you can only have 2. And I went in and I told her, I said, he doesn't just want to be with me. He needs to be with me. Yeah. And of course they included him, they added him to my class, but it's not as simplistic. Yeah. And this kid that had me in just the naughtiest 10th grader, and we've stayed connected since he left. But one day he said his dad jumped into the scene after he had been gone for 17 years. Mom and dad ended up immediately getting married. Mom and biological father ended up getting married. And he came to talk to me one day and he said, you know what my family life is like. And it was a complete train wreck. And I said, Nick, you always have family here. Yeah. And so, and that I just put, and be willing to do it. Yeah. It can't just be a role and a responsibility. It's, we have to have the willingness to do it. And it matters. I was tried to get him to come over for Christmas. He's now going through life and growing and progressing and sharing with me. Like, good. I'm glad that you're proud of yourself now and that you want me to know about it. It
Yeah,
matters.
yeah, yeah. Those are the joys of being a teacher.
True.
And how quickly our time together goes by. Any other last thoughts, or be aware that if we have 2 scheduled Zooms that are in our course as required, we can do others if that would be helpful to you. So keep that in mind. Just so that it's useful to you. I don't want you to do anything that's just jumping through hoops. You're too busy for that. Okay. If that is all, then we will sign off and continue our journey together asynchronously. Okay. Thanks, everybody.